Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Whiskey Diaries. My name is Martin Lang. I'm going to be your host tonight. We're here again at Death and Taxes on our quarantine session with the coronavirus. We are going to try today a very particular distillery as well that is called Green Spot. Well, it's, per se, it's not a distillery, but it's basically a bottling. The reason why I say a bottling and not a distillery is because this whiskey is actually produced in Middletown. That is one of the distilleries, the major distilleries in Ireland. But the whiskey is solely and exclusively produced for Mitchell & Sons. Mitchell & Sons is basically the equivalent of what Johnny Walker used to be in the 1800s. They used to have, in Ireland, they used to have a grocery shop in which they used to sell like all sorts of stuff like hams and whatnot, and then also wines and sherries. And because of that, they used to have a lot of barrels that once they were empty, they didn't know what to do. So the natural progression was to actually start putting whiskey in them. So what they used to do back in the day is buy bulk amount of raw spirit, and they used to put it in the barrels, whatever barrels they did. Now, it's a quite interesting story because the whiskeys that they started doing it was just back in the day. This one in particular was called Green Pat. But then it changed to be Jameson's John, and then eventually, for some reason, it started being called Green Spot. Now, after that whiskey started being called Green Spot, they got the idea of actually just putting a spot in different barrels, marking the different ages. So Blue Spot at the time, this is the early 1800s again, Blue Spot was for the 7-year-old. Then you got the yellow spot, a 12-year-old, and then you got the red spot for a 15-year-old. The most popular one at that time as well was the green spot, that it was a 10-year-old. Now, the current green spot that got relaunched earlier in the 21st century, it's a mix between a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old. They don't put any age statement on this one. And most of them, all of these Spots whiskey are actually aged in a mix between American oak and sherry casks. Now, the reason why I picked this particular distillery is because not many people know about this one, because there are very limited numbers of bottles that you can get. And back in the day, until like 2014, when it got launched in America and Paris, you can only get these whiskies in Ireland. And this is the beauty about it. I never had this whiskey until 2014 when I first opened another bar that is called Cobbler. And since then, it's a beautiful whiskey. You just cannot have enough of this. So going back to the whiskey itself, they just put the spots in the different barrels, and then after that, they just basically just bottle it. Now, at the time, right now, is a triple distilled whiskey that is a single pot Irish whiskey though. Single pot means that it comes from the same distillery and it gets used with a single grain, a single type of grain, mix of grain that is basically barley, and then malted barley and then malted barley. The reason why they use unmalted barley in Irish whiskey is because back in the day as well, it was for tax purposes, because tax at the time was tax on how much malted barley did you have. So Irish being Irish, they tried to go around that tax law and start putting unmalted barley into their whiskies. Now, eventually in the 1900s, that caught on and they liked the flavor and actually produced a little bit more spicier type of whiskey. So Green Spot, as I said, is basically 7 to 10-year-old, mature in 3 different casks, so 2 different casks, American oak and sherry. 40% is quite easy to drink. You cannot go wrong. There are other ones that they do for Green Spot as well, and this is still the 7 to 10-year-old rule, but a third cask gets introduced to this one. That is, I'm not going to even try to pronounce it because my French is not really good, but what I can tell you is just basically is a chateau in France in which they grab the barrels and they finish that in wine barrels. And then this adds an extra layer of complexity to the whiskey, and this is bottled at 46% ABV. And the last one that we're going to do, and this is the last one that we actually have available, because I do another one after this one that is called the Red Spot, but we'll go that into a second. That is the Yellow Spot. The Yellow Spot is 12-year-olds, and this is a 3-cask maturation, which is the normal American oak. Then you've got the sherry, and then you've got the masala cask. A masala cask is basically like a sherry vat, which is 500 liters, but it's a little bit thinner in shape, and the staves of the barrel are actually thicker. So you get a little bit more contact with the wood, and it gives a little bit more rounded flavour to the end of the whiskey. And this is, again, 46% ABV. Now, the other whiskey that they do that I've seen in pictures, I have actually never got my hands around it, and I would love to, is the Red Spot. The Red Spot is a 15-year-old version of this whiskey, and what I read on reviews and all that stuff is actually incredible whiskey as well. And what I heard as well, all the whiskies that I tried from the Green Spot, Yellow Spot, for the Spot, basically bottlings, I just have never had a bad one. They do an extra French cask as well for the Green Spot. And yeah, what can you expect for drinking this whiskey? It's basically just a really good Irish whiskey, which is a lot of maple, like a lot of sweetness coming through it, really soft, really easy drinking. Yeah, you get also you get the vanilla points from the American oak, but at the same time you get all those sherry casks, like dry fruits and everything. And at 46%, it doesn't taste like or smell like a 46% alcohol, and that's what triple distilling does to you. It actually creates a really, really smooth whiskey. Yeah, that's delicious. Yeah, it actually reminds me a lot, personally, of Canadian whiskey, like something like Crown Royal or something like that, obviously in a higher regard. But it's a beautiful whiskey, and if you can get your hands around it, please make sure you do, because it's not easy to find. Salam Jabbar, we'll see you next time.